Imagine Buckingham Palace, not as a symbol of unwavering tradition, but as a pressure cooker. For years, that pressure had been building, a slow simmer of scandal, whispers, and shifting alliances. But then, Meghan Markle arrived, and the heat was cranked up to high. What followed wasn't just a family drama. It was a cultural earthquake that threatened to shatter the very foundation of the monarchy. It all started with a fairy tale. Prince Harry, the charming rogue, falls for a Hollywood star. A whirlwind romance, a dazzling wedding, and suddenly Meghan was thrust into the heart of the royal family. The world watched, captivated by the promise of a modern monarchy, a breath of fresh air in the stuffy corridors of power. But fairy tales, as we know, rarely reflect reality. Behind the smiles and photo ops, a storm was brewing. Meghan, accustomed to the cutthroat world of celebrity, found herself navigating a labyrinth of ancient protocols and unspoken rules. The clash was inevitable. The palace, a fortress of tradition, wasn't ready for Meghan's independent spirit. She challenged the status quo, questioned outdated practices, and dared to speak her mind. To some, she was a revolutionary, a force for progress. To others, she was a disruptive outsider, a threat to the established order. And then there was the press. The British tabloids, notorious for their relentless scrutiny, turned Meghan into a target. Every outfit, every gesture, every word was dissected and scrutinized. The headlines screamed of extravagance, diva demands, and a growing rift between Meghan and the royal family. But the truth, as always, was far more complex. Meghan wasn't just battling the press. She was battling an institution that seemed determined to silence her. Palace insiders whispered of a secret file, a dossier meticulously compiled documenting Meghan's every misstep. This wasn't just about protecting the monarchy, it was about controlling the narrative, about ensuring that Meghan's version of the story never saw the light of day. Enter Prince William, the future king, the man burdened with the weight of the crown. For years, he had played the role of peacemaker, the steady hand guiding the royal family through turbulent times. But Meghan's arrival tested his resolve like never before. He watched as his brother grew increasingly isolated, as the tabloids tore Meghan apart, and as the palace struggled to contain the damage. William found himself caught between two worlds. On one side was his loyalty to his brother, his desire to protect Harry and his new wife. On the other side was his duty to the crown, his responsibility to preserve the monarchy for future generations. The pressure was immense, the stakes impossibly high. The breaking point, according to palace insiders, came with the leak of a private letter. A letter written by Meghan to her father, a desperate plea for understanding, a raw and emotional outpouring of grief. The tabloids seized on it, twisting Meghan's words, portraying her as manipulative and self-serving. For William, this was the final straw. The monarchy, already reeling from scandal, was now facing a full-blown crisis. Something had to be done, and he knew that the responsibility fell on his shoulders. The question was, how far was he willing to go to protect the crown? How much was he willing to sacrifice? The stage was set for a showdown. The players were in position. The world held its breath. But what happened next wasn't a carefully orchestrated battle plan. It was a series of escalating skirmishes, each one more damaging than the last. William's announcement, the severing of ties, was the first shot fired. It was a declaration of war, a clear message that the monarchy would not be bullied, that tradition would prevail over disruption. But it was also a deeply personal betrayal, a wound that would take years to heal, if it ever healed at all. Harry, blindsided and enraged, retreated to California, to the sanctuary of his wife and the promise of a new life. But the echoes of the past followed him. The weight of his family's expectations, the sting of his brother's rejection. He was no longer a prince of the realm. He was an exile, stripped of his titles, his purpose, his identity. Meghan, ever the strategist, saw an opportunity. The world was watching, eager to hear her side of the story. She seized the moment, granting interviews, launching podcasts, crafting a narrative of victimhood and resilience. She painted herself as a woman of color silenced by a racist institution, a modern-day Diana battling the forces of darkness. The response was immediate and divisive. Supporters rallied to her cause, hailing her as a truth-teller, a champion of social justice. Critics accused her of manipulation, of exploiting her royal connections for personal gain. The internet became a battleground, a cacophony of accusations and counter-accusations. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Catherine quietly took charge. She understood that this wasn't just a public relations crisis. It was a battle for the hearts and minds of the British people. She embarked on a charm offensive, visiting hospitals, schools, and charities, radiating warmth and compassion. She was the embodiment of royal duty, a stark contrast to Meghan's Hollywood glamour. But behind the smiles and photo ops, Catherine was waging a more subtle war. She was reaching out to palace staff, reassuring them, rebuilding trust, and subtly reminding them of the importance of loyalty. She was the glue holding the monarchy together, the silent force that prevented it from crumbling. The secret file, the dossier of Meghan's alleged misdeeds, became a weapon in this war. Leaked to select journalists, it painted a picture of a manipulative and demanding woman, a schemer who had exploited her royal status for personal gain. The file was a calculated act of character assassination, a desperate attempt to discredit Meghan and reclaim the narrative. But the leak backfired. It confirmed Meghan's accusations of a palace smear campaign, of a concerted effort to silence her. It fueled the narrative of a cold and heartless institution, an organization willing to stoop to any level to protect its reputation. The phone call, the final conversation between William and Harry, became the stuff of legend. Word-for-word accounts leaked to the press, each side spinning the story to their advantage. It was a Shakespearean tragedy, two brothers torn apart by duty, loyalty, and the insatiable demands of the crown. The monarchy teetered on the brink. Public confidence plummeted. The future of the institution hung in the balance. And in the midst of the chaos, Catherine quietly plotted her next move. She knew that the war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The chessboard was set, the pieces were in place, and the final act was about to unfold. Catherine understood the assignment. This wasn't about winning a PR battle. It was about winning the long game. While Meghan played to the cameras, Catherine played to the institution, reinforcing the very pillars Meghan sought to dismantle. She knew that in the court of public opinion, the flashiest performance rarely wins. Staying power does. The strategy was simple: unwavering duty, quiet strength, and an almost unnerving ability to project an image of serene control even as the palace walls seemed to crumble around her. It was a masterclass in emotional intelligence, a silent sermon on the virtues of tradition in a world obsessed with novelty. But there was a razor's edge to Catherine's composure. Those closest to her saw the strain, the sleepless nights, the barely perceptible tremor in her voice when the topic of Harry and Meghan arose. She was holding the monarchy together, but at what personal cost? The unveiling of a new portrait at the National Portrait Gallery became a pivotal moment. Catherine, radiant in an Alexander McQueen gown, stood beside William, the picture of regal grace. The press fawned. The public swooned. It was a carefully curated image of unity and strength, a visual rebuke to the chaos and division that had plagued the royal family. But the portrait was more than just a pretty picture. It was a statement, a reminder of what the monarchy represented: continuity, stability, and an unwavering commitment to duty. It was a subtle but powerful message to Meghan that her attempts to modernize the institution had failed. The old guard was still in charge. The whispers started circulating. Catherine was the new Diana. But the comparison was facile. Diana was a rebel, a tragic figure who challenged the monarchy from within. Catherine was a protector, a strategic player who understood that the best way to preserve the institution was to adapt to the changing times, but on its own terms. The Jubilee celebrations became a turning point. Meghan and Harry were relegated to the sidelines, their presence a mere footnote in the grand narrative of royal history. Catherine, front and center, basked in the adulation of the crowd, a symbol of hope and renewal. The message was clear: the monarchy was moving on, with or without them. But Meghan wasn't ready to concede defeat. The release of her memoir sent shockwaves through the palace, a tell-all account of her experiences as a royal outsider. It was a scorched earth strategy, a final attempt to rewrite the narrative and expose the hypocrisy and prejudice she claimed to have encountered. The book was a sensation, dominating headlines for weeks. But it also backfired. Many readers found Meghan's tone self-pitying and vindictive. Her accusations of racism and mistreatment were met with skepticism. The public, weary of the drama, began to tune out. William, guided by Catherine's steady hand, refused to engage. He understood that responding to Meghan's accusations would only fuel the fire. Silence was their most potent weapon. Let Meghan have her say, they reasoned. The truth would eventually emerge. And it did. Slowly, subtly, the tide began to turn. Palace insiders, emboldened by William and Catherine's unwavering resolve, began to speak out. They shared stories of Meghan's demanding behavior, her manipulation of the press, and her disregard for royal protocol. The narrative began to shift. The interview with Oprah Winfrey, once seen as a PR triumph for Meghan, became a liability. Her claims were dissected and debunked. Her motives were questioned. The public began to see her not as a victim, but as a calculating opportunist. The final act was yet to be written, but one thing was clear: Catherine had won the battle for the soul of the monarchy. She had outmaneuvered Meghan, not with flashy pronouncements or dramatic gestures, but with quiet strength, unwavering duty, and an almost preternatural understanding of the power of tradition. The crown for now was secure, but the war, like all royal wars, was far from over. The House of Windsor had weathered another storm, but the scars remained, a permanent reminder of the turbulent reign of Meghan, the American outsider who dared to challenge the ancient order.